such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is a solved case about a mortician turned murderer. Now, one person with an outstanding reputation and another everyone seemed to avoid, yet it's quite the opposite of what you might imagine. The truth in this case seems to be a mystery that the criminal justice system claims to have solved, but many still have questions today. Who was the victim? Who was the monster? And what truly caused a murder? By the way, I post so much content like this. It is my absolute passion to tell these stories, and I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so. So if it's something you'd like to support me in doing, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed with the post notification bell on, giving this video a thumbs up, and leaving a nice comment down below. I also want to remind you that it is ODDtober, meaning that I am posting every Thursday and Sunday at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time with the strangest cases I can possibly find. So make sure that you are coming back every Thursday and Sunday at 2 p.m. Now, I also want to remind you that I have merchandise out. I'll put the pictures of it here on the screen if you are interested in getting it. I worked really hard on it with an artist, and I really love the design. I think it encompasses our community, and I would really be happy if you would get some and take some pictures of it so I can see you guys in it. But I also want to thank today's sponsor, which is Magellan TV, and I'm so honored to be working with Magellan TV once again because they are a wonderful documentary streaming service that has so many documentaries that I had never heard about prior to getting on this site. Now, you can not only learn about science, history, true crime, and so many different topics, but you can educate yourselves on topics that I had never even thought to research, or cases that I had never heard about. And that's what I truly love about this site. It's like the hidden treasures, the little gems of documentaries. They're all such great quality with no ads to have to skip through. And one that I recently watched that I wanted to tell you guys about was one called Night Terror, The Search for Truth. And this is about a man named Brett Golden, who is an actor, and Richard Bloom, who was a fashion designer. Now, these two lovely gay men were actually abducted and murdered in 2006 in Cape Town. And I really recommend you watching it because it was very victim focused, very heartbreaking. But if that doesn't seem to interest you, there are hundreds of other documentaries to choose from, and you can get a 1-month free trial with the link in my description box. If you click it right now, you'll be able to search all of their documentaries and learn so much more than you could have ever imagined. So again, just click the link in the description box for a 1-month free trial, and I really know that you will enjoy it. You will not regret it. But thanks again to Magellan TV for sponsoring this portion of the video. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1997 in Texas, and Marjorie Nugent lived in Carthage, and she was an 81-year-old, very wealthy woman who had been born into money. You see, her father had owned a grocery store, and growing up, they were among the wealthiest in this small town. However, a lot of people were coming into new money from the oil that they were getting out of the land in this area. Now, they were, of course, oil drilling, and this caused them to become wealthy themselves. But people like Marjorie and her family, who came from money, who had worked for it prior, kind of felt like this wasn't fair, and they felt like outcasts to these people who were having tons of money suddenly come to them. So when she got old enough, Marjorie decided to leave the area. She wanted a fresh start, and she attended LA Tech. This is where she would meet a man named Roderick Nugent, and these two would fall in love. He was actually just graduated with a degree in electrical engineering, and he was about to get a great job. So the two of them moved to Louisiana, and Roderick got a job at Magnolia Oil, and they also started a family there, and they had their first baby boy named Rod. As their son grew up and grew out of the house, he left, he went on his own. The couple decided to go back to Marjorie's hometown of Carthage, and this is where Roderick began to control the interests in the bank, and they slowly integrated themselves back into the community. Except Marjorie didn't really want to be friendly with anyone. She believed she was almost better than all of them, and this included her own family who still lived there as well. Her son also stayed away from his mother and father because she was constantly talking about his career and his girlfriends and just the fact that he always made bad decisions and kind of talked down on him. Now, this is very strange for me to be kind of talking about the victim in such a mean way. I really always try to uplift the victim, be the most respectful. However, in this case, it's a bit different. And unfortunately, to really understand it and to understand how the community felt about Marjorie Nugent, this is kind of what I have to say. The truth. Gossip was said to run this small town, and they all knew Marjorie's family and knew that she had quite a bit of trouble with them. She was said to have quite the cocky personality all the way back when she was younger, and as she had gotten older and become, a millionaire herself, kept her money and was, used to having this money, she expected everyone to kind of wait on her hand and foot. She was said to be the type of person who treated waiters, cashiers, and anybody who wasn't in power like garbage. She showed no empathy or respect towards them. She would yell at waiters if her food took too long, if it was cold, if her drink wasn't filled up in time, if her groceries weren't rung up in the right way. She micromanaged everyone around her, yet she didn't want to do anything for herself because she expected other people to do it for her. She had enough money that ensured she never had to. This caused many who came in contact with her to immediately hate her, and they said that if she held her nose any higher, she would have drowned in a rainstorm. The only one who was said to be able to stand her was her husband, Roderick, but unfortunately in 1990 he went in for a routine surgery and actually passed away during this surgery. So Marjorie was now a widow, and this funeral happened at one of the churches in Carthage, and this was normally a time when the community came together. It was like a social gathering. People loved to eat the different casseroles and just talk to each other and celebrate the life of the person who had died. However, when it came to Roderick's funeral, nobody showed up. It was very slim, the amount of people who arrived, and this was said to be because nobody wanted to put up with Marjorie. At this point, Marjorie was completely alone, but with millions of dollars, she didn't use this money to help the community, to put it into charities, to do anything helpful. She kept it all to herself and holed herself up in her huge mansion. But in 1996, suddenly this all changed. They were getting donations around town from Marjorie of, huge sums of money to help out with local businesses and schools and individuals who needed help buying homes. It seemed as though something had changed inside of Marjorie, and she was finally seeing what good she could do with this money. Like this woman had grown a heart. That's what everybody believed had happened. But the interesting thing was nobody had seen or heard from Marjorie in quite a long time, almost a year, to thank her for her contributions. It was just kind of a faceless thing that she was sending out money but still staying at home. This was said to be because Marjorie was traveling the world and was rarely at home, but the truth was much darker. You see, the next year, in August of 1997, Marjorie's stockbroker, the man who dealt with a lot of her finances, he began to get worried. He desperately was trying to get a hold of her because he was worried, since he hadn't talked to her in a while, that he wasn't doing what she wanted with her money. And of course, with Marjorie being such a perfectionist and wanted everything done a certain way, he was afraid he was going to do something wrong and get fired. So he was trying to get a hold of her to make sure everything was going smoothly, but he called her and she was not returning his phone calls. So that is when he decided to take it into his own hands, and he went to her house to speak to her in person. He knocked and knocked and no one answered, but he peered through the window and then saw that no one was inside. That's when he contacted the Carthage police, and from there, the police decided to go and check out her home themselves, thinking they possibly had a missing person on their hands. They knocked on the door as well and still got no response. However, the people of the community believed that they knew where she could be. You see, Marjorie hadn't really been alone after her husband's death. During a funeral, she had met a man named Bernie Tiede. One of his many jobs was a preacher and to do the music for funerals and for church services. Bernie was said to be extremely talented at comforting grieving widows and was always telling them that he could help them out with whatever they needed. To everyone's surprise, Marjorie really liked Bernie, and he seemed to be the only person she ever liked besides Roderick. But Bernie became the person that she would go to for everything. He became her errand boy, and eventually Bernie left all of his other jobs to work for her full time. It almost became like a caregiver position where he was with her all the time, and at this point they began to travel together. The Carthage community rarely saw Marjorie and Bernie for 6 years. Every once in a while they would come back to town to take a break from traveling, but they didn't ever leave Marjorie's home. So everyone was speculating that they had some sort of romantic relationship possibly that had kind of escalated from their friendship. But some people thought that this was extremely unlikely because Bernie was thought to be gay, but he hadn't ever come out, so they couldn't be sure. Either way, investigators now knew that there was a good chance that Marjorie was just traveling with Bernie and forgot to check her cell phone. So they decided to try to get in contact with them. They called Bernie, and he answered the phone saying he was in Las Vegas to sing at a friend's wedding. They asked him if Marjorie was with him, and that's when he said she wasn't. That is when the investigators became concerned once again. They asked Bernie where Marjorie was then because she wasn't at home, and he began to say that she was actually in the hospital. Now, since no one, including her family members, knew about this news, they asked for more information. Bernie told them that she had become ill and was getting some tests done at a hospital right outside of Carthage. This was because she didn't want her family and friends to know she was sick, and that's also why she used an alias to admit herself. Investigators asked him why Marjorie wouldn't want her family to know she was sick and would want to use an alias. Bernie had said that this was because her son Rod had been really interested in his inheritance and had wanted to get it early, and she was afraid if he heard that she was sick that he would try to take advantage of this to take her money. Hearing all of this, they were a little less worried, and they let Bernie get off the phone to attend this wedding only under the assumption that he was going to come home in a few days and talk to them. So they let him go. But in the meantime, they were also trying to search for Marjorie themselves. They searched a whole bunch of different hospitals under the alias that Bernie had given them, but nothing was coming up. No hospital was showing that anyone was admitted under this name. That's when they decided to have another look into her home to see if possibly she was in there or if there was a different clue showing what alias she used or where she really was. Investigators used Marjorie's only son, Rod, to be able to search the home because he was her relative. He could give rights to get into this home. So the only problem with this was he could come and allow them to search, but he didn't have a key. So they actually had to take the door off the hinges to get into this home. They got inside and quickly realized something was wrong because there was dust everywhere. There was also rotten food in the fridge from like a year prior. There was piles of paper and mail scattered everywhere. And it really did seem like nobody had inhabited this home in a year. Bernie had arrived back in town at this point, and he didn't immediately go to the police station. In fact, investigators had to pick him up at a local pizza shop where he was ordering pizza for a Little League team because they had just won, and he was telling them how proud he was of them, so he bought them pizza. When he was brought into the interrogation room, he quickly admitted to lying about Marjorie being in the hospital. And that's when he told them something that they were not prepared for. He said that Marjorie had been kidnapped for her money. Meanwhile, the other investigators were still at Marjorie's home searching, and that is when they would come across something that would cause them to immediately look for suspects. And their first suspect was standing right next to them. Rod was immediately questioned in the murder of his mother. Could this be why Marjorie was found in a freezer in the garage wrapped in a white sheet? The freezer had been taped shut and there was frozen food laid on top of her. Did her own son kill her? Investigators immediately took this body in for an autopsy, but they didn't want it to thaw, so they actually hooked the freezer up to a gas-powered generator and put it on the back of a pickup truck for the drive. Rod was brought in to be interrogated as well, and at this point he told them something that changed how they looked at him completely. Rod claimed that he didn't want his mother's money because he knew he wasn't going to get it, because his mother had taken him out of the will completely. He said she had taken him out years ago because they didn't get along, so he would be getting no money for her death. But could he have killed her just because she took him out of the will? That's what they still needed to figure out and to see if he was even telling the truth. So investigators began to look into Marjorie's will, and sure enough, 6 years prior in 1991, Rod had been taken out completely. But what the will said next, or instead, was the most surprising. And that was that Marjorie's money wasn't going to her family at all. It was going to Bernie. Bernie, who was still being interrogated, finally admitted that he lied. There were no kidnappers. At the same time, Marjorie was being looked over at the autopsy, which had found that she had 4 bullet wounds to the back. She had also died 9 months prior. This is not something that happened recently. Then, to everyone's surprise, Sweet Bernie admitted to killing Marjorie on November 19th of 1996. He claimed that he used the gun that he used to shoot armadillos with, which was a .22 caliber rifle, and shot her in the back 4 times. The first was said to paralyze her as she fell to the ground, and then he got closer and shot her 3 more times. When she was dead, he wrapped her up in a blanket and put her in the freezer to give him some time to give her a proper burial. But 9 months later, she was still there. Bernie then admitted that he had been the one to donate to different parts of the community using Marjorie's money, and that he had also bought himself nice items. It was found that Bernie had spent almost $3 million and could do so because Marjorie made him the power of attorney over her funds before he killed her. So investigators then charged Bernie with Marjorie's murder, but the question still remained: why did he do it? Was this all for money? Were they ever in a real relationship? Or was he a con man who went after elderly widows? Well, Bernie claimed it had nothing to do with money at all, that was basically just a good side effect. He said that he did everything for Marjorie, that he really did do all of her errands and took care of her, and they got into a relationship after this, but she still would push him around, make him comb her hair, clip her toenails, and she showed him no affection or respect. He said that over the years she began to get more possessive and hateful, and Bernie then claimed she was evil and wicked. But since this was his job, he stayed. He said that there were many times that he fantasized about hitting her over the head with a bat, but he never had the courage to. But when he finally did shoot her, it was because she was nagging at him over everything in his life and talking about his friends, and in a fit of anger, he picked up this gun and shot at her. He said he used the gun because he didn't want her to suffer. And he said all of this in a handwritten confession. The strangest part was the town heard Bernie's confession, and they knew that he had killed Marjorie, but they didn't want him to be put in jail. In fact, a lot of them prayed every single night together at church that he would not be convicted, and they tried to raise $1.5 million for his bond. When they were getting close, the DA actually got it upped to $2.7 million by adding the charges of theft on. Bernie was known by many as the nicest guy. You see, he had been born in Texas, but his father had immigrated as a child from Ukraine. His father, Bernhard, was a music professor and a church music director, and his mother had actually died in a car accident when he was only 2 years old. When Bernie was 15, his father died as well, and he would go on to just live with his stepmother. Bernie then went on to work in Carthage at the Hawthorne Funeral Home as a mortician. From there, he also worked at the church. He worked in funerals and church services, but everyone knew him as a good-hearted man, and everyone loved him. Because of this, the DA decided that there probably weren't going to be 12 citizens that would convict him, so the trial was moved to a different county. This was actually St. Augustine, which was 60 miles away. Although there was much speculation that this was for another reason entirely. You see, while searching Marjorie's home where Bernie was staying, they found Bernie's belongings, and this included a box of tapes. There was said to be videos of Bernie being with different men and very sexual manners. The most surprising part, though, was that the men on these tapes were men who were well known around town. They were said to be local officials, people of high power, and also men who were married to women. So some believed that the DA was worried that one of these men would be chosen as a jury member and wouldn't convict Bernie because of what he knew or what he could expose about them. So this was just another layer of crazy speculations and theories surrounding this case that made it so huge in the media and to the public. With Clifton Holmes as his attorney, they were trying to get a plea bargain. During this trial, Bernie did say that he didn't plan to kill her, but when she was nagging at him that day, he was realizing that he couldn't stand another day with her, that he was thinking about having to live the rest of his life with this woman and couldn't do it. The defense tried to say that he was a victim of mental and verbal abuse and this was self-defense. But only 90 minutes of deliberation later, Bernie was found guilty, convicted of first-degree murder, and sentenced to life in prison. The DA said, "We don't forgive backshooters in Texas, especially someone who backshoots a woman." People in the crowd, though, were so angry. They began to scream, "We love you, Bernie," and this was as he was taken out of the courtroom. Bernie appealed this, but it was ruled that there was sufficient evidence for their conviction, and it was denied. People in the community were so distraught about this, thinking that Bernie did not deserve this sentence. They believed that anyone who lived with this Marjorie woman would have done the same thing because they knew how much of a mean person that she was said to be. But in 2011, a film was released about this case called Bernie that starred Shirley MacLaine and Jack Black. And a man writing for Texas Monthly named Skip Hollingsworth visited Bernie in prison after this movie was released and found that the official at the prison said that he was a model prisoner. Bernie was said to use his time in there cross-stitching memorials for families who had just lost a relative. When Skip was talking to Bernie, Bernie allegedly began to cry, saying that he didn't know why he did what he did. When Skip asked why Bernie didn't just leave instead of killing her, Bernie said he couldn't have abandoned her because he was her only friend. This wouldn't be the end of the story, though. You see, when this film came out, an attorney named Jody Cole then met with Bernie. She believed that there had to be an explanation to why someone so endearing would commit such a violent crime who had never done so before. Looking over all of the evidence, Jody then found that the police had recovered 4 books in Marjorie's home that were from Bernie that were of childhood sexual abuse. And eventually she spoke to Bernie about what had happened to him. And Bernie had told her that he had been assaulted as a child by his uncle. At this point, a forensic psychiatrist named Richard Pezikoff interviewed Bernie, hearing about what he had gone through. And this psychiatrist said, Bernie's ability to repress and compartmentalize the abusive events from childhood and adolescence was ultimately overwhelmed by the repeated and extensive psychological abuse he suffered from Miss Nugent. On November 19th, 1996, after Nugent had made some particularly unpleasant comments about one of Tiede's friends, Tiede completely lost control of his emotions and behavior and experienced a psychological dissociative experience in which he felt as if he were floating outside of his body when he shot her. Jody, hearing this, filed a writ of habeas corpus, which means that a prisoner can be brought to court to determine if the imprisonment is unlawful. She believed, Jody did, that if the jurors had heard this evidence about Bernie's past, that they wouldn't have said that he committed premeditated murder, because it was all of her mental abuse that led up to this on that day. That would have meant that he could have gotten a lesser sentence, which is what they were going for. The DA actually surprisingly sided with Jody and filed an affidavit saying that if he would have known about Bernie's past, Bernie would have been prosecuted under the sudden passion provision, which meant that he couldn't have been given more than a 20-year sentence. While awaiting this new trial, Bernie walked free on bond. Marjorie's family said they didn't agree with him being released, and her son Rod said that Bernie systematically estranged his mother from all of her family, one person at a time, and made them become angry with her, basically saying that he was the reason that she was not liked by her family and didn't have that support because he took her away from them. Everyone was viewing Bernie at this time as the victim, and Marjorie's family was so distraught over this, as they should be, considering they're the one who had their loved one killed. But 2 years later, it took 2 years for this trial, meaning Bernie was released for 2 years. This was April 6th of 2016, and this was the new trial. Bernie said that he wasn't worried about going to prison because you might be able to incarcerate a body, but you couldn't incarcerate his soul. People of the community testified for Bernie, saying that while he was released for those 2 years, he attended therapy, didn't do drugs or drink, he didn't break any laws, he dressed up as Santa and gave the children gifts every year, and many people believe that he was a reformed man and would never do this again. However, a new psychiatrist for the prosecution looked at Bernie and said that he had gotten over his childhood abuse and showed signs of narcissism and antisocial personality disorder instead. Although I do want to point out that it's not as easy as just getting over childhood abuse, so I'm not sure what exactly they meant by that, but I think that it was poor wording on their part. But nonetheless, they believed that he hadn't done it because of his childhood abuse, but because he was a narcissist with antisocial personality disorder, and that's what they were trying to say. The defense was asking for Bernie to either walk free right there or just serve 3 more years, so it would be a maximum of 20 years. And that was because he was said to be healed and would bring good into people's lives. However, the prosecution, on the other hand, said that Bernie had pulled a long con on a widow who hadn't tormented him at all. They said that he had stolen millions from her and killed her so she wouldn't find out. Yet witnesses said that Marjorie actually knew he was spending lots of money and was okay with it, because she said she'd rather spend all of her money and not have a dime left than give it to her family. The jury took 4 hours to deliberate this time, and they came back with a guilty verdict. He was sentenced to life once again. However, this was appealed, and 3 months later, the theft charges against him were dropped, but his sentence was not reduced. Bernie is now at the Connolly Unit at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and is eligible for parole in 2029. But what do you think the truth is in this case? There are so many questions that are sort of left unanswered. There's lots of different theories, but there is no concrete proof that he was a con man or that she was this horrible person who deserved it. So this is just a hard case to talk about all around. Let me know down below what you think, and make sure to come back on Thursdays and Sundays for more episodes of ODDtober, and also check out Magellan TV for their documentaries in the meantime, because there are so many different things you can learn about on there that will completely blow your mind. So that will be linked down below. But don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.